a lot of the work we were doing together was around clarity. It was around their reality was a small team trying to build something that hasn't been done before. There's no manual. There's no guidelines. There's no best practice, or there's lots of best practice, but the best practice are of the people that have come before you that were doing something different. And a lot of what you're challenging is maybe if those best practices are actually the best practices. So you don't want to go there necessarily.
I'm Claire Barry, and this is the Urban Curiosity Podcast, the show that inspires you to slow down and see things differently. Each week, I talk to interesting urbanites about creativity, human connection, and how to thrive in a city addicted to speed. Hello and welcome to the Urban Curiosity Podcast. I'm your host, Claire Barry, and today's guest is Mathias Jakobsen, who is the creator of Think Clearly. Born in Denmark, he founded his first company at age 15, building digital solutions for companies. Powered by digital, he later branched into fashion journalism and photography before moving to New York City, where he worked as an advisor and consultant for startup CEOs and corporate executives. He has worked with Bloomberg, Google, Hyper Island, Carrot Creative Holsti, the Wharton School, and many more. Welcome to the show, Mathias.
Thank you, Claire. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your journey from Denmark to New York City.
Yeah. Well, so the interesting thing to talk about here in the context of this podcast, specifically the topic of urban and cities, was that up until second year in high school, I saw really no purpose in traveling anywhere. I was fine where I was living. The only problem was that there were no mountains in Denmark. And if I wanted to go skiing, which I really badly wanted to do when it was winter, it was hard to get the mountain to come to me. So the only reason for travel was to go to the mountains. And so I would travel to Sweden or to France or wherever to go skiing. But that was all. Otherwise, there was no purpose in that. But then second year in high school, we had a week-long class trip to Barcelona. And that was like a major, major turning point for me. Like, it's because of Barcelona that I live in New York now. Because we were out and we saw all these things. And I mean, a lot of it was interesting and it was a good time, but particularly La Sagrada Familia, the cathedral that is still 200 years later, still unfinished, but designed by this famous architect. It was so moving. Like, I was brought to tears by this building and the thinking and the idea and just everything about it. I think after that, I had this whole new commitment to go look for places around the world where I could feel at home in a different way. And so I went on vacation to France, to Paris. Initial hypothesis was that it was about big cities, because Aarhus, where I'm from, is a relatively small town. So I went to Paris. I spent 3 weeks living in London, studying in the London School of Economics for a summer. I went to New York on vacation with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife and mother of our 3 dragons. So it was really like this whole exploration of cities. And along that, New York was the place that just felt different from all the other ones. Like, all the other ones felt like cities that were great. And I feel very comfortable in London, for example. I'm very comfortable in London. But in New York, I felt at home. And so we spent the next 5-6 years figuring out how we could move here.
Wow. So what is it that you find really wonderful about living in New York?
Now it's been more than 10 years since we started the journey, and we've been living full time here for 6 years. I'm a citizen now. My wife is a citizen. Our kids are dual citizens.
Right.
And I still struggle to explain it exactly, or at least to say it's that. It's more like there's a lot of things that all together combine into this. But I think it's actually quite interesting that I can't point exactly to it. And I'm trying, I get asked this question all the time, what is it about New York? But I think sometimes it's just a feeling that both practically when I walk around, when I move around, it just feels very natural to me. I think it's also a huge part of it is the people that I've met here. I feel that I meet people and get to spend time with people that appreciate and understand diversity beyond just the There's like a lot of talk about diversity where it's like, it's very much about how people look, gender, origins, all that. And I think that is part of diversity too. But there's also a part of diversity that is like how you think and what you believe and what you aspire to do and your scale of your ambition or how similar or dissimilar it is to other people. And I think this is one of the places where I don't feel I'm as weird as I feel in most other places. I feel that I am seen and appreciated for who I am when I'm here.
That's so interesting. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how it's influenced by living in this city where you feel you're seen in a way that's different to other places in the world.
Yeah. Well, so the work that I do is also something I sometimes struggle to explain. But part of the work, at least, I can talk about. Part of the work is teaching other people to be and to try and to explore new things. So it's not so much like teaching people a skill. It's also much more about teaching people a way of using a skill that they may already have from a place of exploration. So I did a workshop this week on Wednesday in São Paulo in Brazil, and where the topic is visual thinking. But most people already do that without realizing it. They're just not very confident in the way that they do it, and they do it in one way. And the reason they're not confident in it is that they feel that the way that they're doing it is not right, or it's not serving them properly. So really the whole workshop is about exploring more broadly all the different ways that you can do this and learning to see moment to moment what is working, what is not working, going where it works. So you have like a broader space of opportunity to try things and an awareness to choose and to realize what's working quickly and what's not working and then change it. So, a lot of people in those classes will ask questions like, oh, but what are your best tips or like do's and don'ts? And it's like the things that are good in one situation can be really bad in another situation. So if you draw very confidently, you have a very clean, beautiful line, that can be great if that's what people want. But it can also mean that everybody feels that it's your drawing, that it's your visual, and they don't dare to engage with it. And in those cases, you might be much better off having not such a beautiful, not such a great, clear, simple line. You might actually be better off being a little bit more messy, because that invites other people to grab the pen and come into the collaboration. So there are really no like clear right or wrong, good or bad. It's the awareness of it. You could say that's at least a huge part of the work that I do. And I think living in this environment probably affects it by, I don't know, it's still relatively niche in terms of work. So maybe it's like part of it is being in big urban centers where even if it's only relevant to 1 out of 10,000 people, I can still find enough people that are interested in it. I think that's maybe part of it. And then the other thing is that living in New York is just kind of from a global perspective, it's a very central hub. You can go almost anywhere in the world within a little more than 20 hours. You can get to pretty much anywhere from New York. So even though it's like the world is round, it's like, yeah, but the infrastructure that we rely on to get around with airlines has a massive bias towards a place like New York in a good way.
A good way for you.
Yes.
That's a really, it's a really, really good point. Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. So when you have been on a trip and you have returned, you've landed back in New York, what do you do to kind of reconnect with yourself and reconnect with the city? For instance, do you have a favorite walk? Is there a favorite secret location where you go and pick up a coffee or hang out with your kids, your wife?
I think I wish that there was such a thing. Right now, it's a little bit more like Thursday morning, I landed at 6:58 and I turn on my phone in the morning. We just landed.
Yeah.
And I get this text from my wife that our middle child, Una, has been up between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. And then the other one was up and she just had this like terrible night. And so it's a little bit more like, okay, reality kicks back in. It's like, get in a cab, get home, deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. So I think there's not so much like romantically connecting with the city. It's a little bit more like just cleaning up, wiping up, handling the situation.
I get it. So has there ever been a time in your career where you've really suffered with burnout?
Yeah, I think Actually, I don't know if it really got to the point of burnout, but there was definitely a time when around college years when I was living in Denmark and I was running my own company and in school and, doing all these things, I definitely was affected by stress in a very, like always, like an unhealthy way where I would get sick and just not deal with it in a good way. I'm not immune to it at all today either, but I feel I'm able to detect the warning signs a lot earlier, which doesn't mean that it goes away, but I can at least know what it is much, much sooner. And I know some of the things I can do to engage with it rather than just assuming that it's nothing and that it will just figure itself out. That's, I think, the main thing.
Right. That's one of the things that I think is so great about getting older. And there are many things I do not think are great about getting older, but at least the longer you've been in the world and the more experience you've had of how you respond and what your body and your mind does in these moments of acute stress and chronic stress. My experience at least, it's certainly something I'm quicker to recognize and to mitigate, which sounds similar to you.
Yeah.
Are there any specific tips that you could recommend for people in these moments? For instance, how do you carve out moments of stillness or quietness in your hectic New York life with a young family?
It's totally possible, and it is very important. One of the things has been simply learning about the places and finding the places in New York that are conducive to that. I mean, right now I'm very fortunate that I work primarily at a consultancy called SY Partners, where we have this incredible, amazing office. And so for me, it's a treat every day that I get to go to work in this place because it's so not the hectic, noisy New York. It's like it's a whole universe in and of itself. But when I was freelancing and building my own things, it was a lot more like I had to explore and figure out. And I found different hotel lobbies where, they would have coffee service and meal service and stuff. And it was legitimate to sit there even if you weren't a guest in the hotel because it was basically just like a restaurant that was quieter. So I found these little nooks, corners that were quiet. And it's not like there's a ton of them in New York, but there are enough. And when you find them, you can find that peace and quiet space. And I think that is super, super important in this, that it's like not accepting the stereotype. People say, oh, New York is so loud, it's so this. Like, yes, that is what it mostly is, but it doesn't mean that it always is that. If you want that, hecticness, fine, like go roll with it, but it doesn't need to be that way. And you don't need to define your identity as I'm someone who lives in New York and I'm someone who loves the hustle and bustle. Like, I don't necessarily love the hustle and bustle, but I'm also not, it doesn't bother me that much. I look for and I find the places that have more tranquility, if you want to use that word.
So what time of day do you most enjoy and why?
I kind of like mornings. Not always at least the beginning of the workday I kind of like because it's like getting coffee and like making a plan for the day and taking a little bit of a moment before meetings and emails and everything begins. I like that. The morning at home can be a little bit more like, again, you're just a waiter who has to serve breakfast and like convince the VIP guests that maybe they should get out of the bathrobe and actually put on clothes. And it's a little bit more like manhandling in a loving and caring way, obviously.
Obviously.
But mornings is definitely a favorite. But there's something special also about the evenings. I'm not a big like night owl in general, but there are these quiet moments also where the whole household has gone to sleep and I'm in the living room and it's like I don't turn on too much light and I can either sit and read a book. I don't want to sound like I'm somebody who just like sits and reads a book. It's like once a month, that this happens. But when it happens, maybe that's why it's also special. To sit on the couch for, until I pass out and read a book. Yeah.
So that's an interesting point for me to ask you about your relationship with social media, with time on the internet when you're away from the workplace. And that's obviously bearing in mind that for so many of us, the workplace isn't necessarily a physical place when we are walking around with mobile devices, which is where we can connect with work any time that we choose.
Yeah. I mean, it's a challenge. And for me, it goes through waves. It relates even back to what I was saying before about my work, helping people explore rather than like trying to find the right way. It's like there's a right way in a moment, but you won't know if it's the right way. Even if it is, you won't know if you just like have committed to one and you're just doing one thing. And I think it's the same thing with social media. Like I'm not too worried about finding the right balance or like when is the right time or how will I do it or how will I not do it or why will I not do it or all that. So for me, I let it kind of, go through cycles where in some cycles I'm very deliberate and intentional, but also like very much in it all the time. So I will use an app like Buffer, where you can schedule tweets and Facebook posts and basically like fill it up with all sorts of ideas and let them trickle out a couple a day with like big questions or big ideas or, whatever is like on my mind. And it's also generous in a way. It's like sharing a lot of stuff. Like I don't mean sharing as like sharing an article that makes me look smart and shows people that I read The Economist. It's more about sharing ideas and sharing myself and being open and asking questions and sharing difficult moments and opening up to the fact that parenting is not always, the images on Instagram where the kids are smiling. Sometimes it's also like a lot of crying and a lot of moments where it's like, there is no good solution here. There is no like magic bullet. It's like you're in it and there's vomit everywhere, both literally and figuratively. So that's the phase. And then I'm on it all the time. Like then it's the first thing I do in the morning and it's the last thing I do before I go to bed. And it's like, it's an integral part of how I live day by day, week by week. And I like that. I think that's an interesting form of being, especially when it gets really, really open and honest and genuine and loving and caring. I found a few things that stand out. I shared a moment with challenging weekend with the kids. And I ended up making a whole new friend who reached out, and he turned out to be a psychologist living near Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And we connected, and now I feel like we're becoming friends. We see each other on Skype relatively frequently now. And it was all because we connected over this moment that I posted on Instagram. Like that's magical that can happen, I think. That's magical because it's a new relationship. But I've also had these magical gatherings on Facebook where I've asked a question or shared something around. I think I remember a specific post where I shared around my using of melatonin as a sleep aid and just like was asking people. And it became this, the opposite of trolling. It was like people with very different opinions that were genuinely listening to each other, contributing, giving themselves. It was like medical doctors who were sharing what they knew from the latest research around this, both for long-term, short-term use and And it was people that were just open and admitting, like, me and my husband, we do this every night and we've done this for years. And like, we know that maybe there are risks, but we just find that it is so delightful to do this. It was such a like gathering of people that were all my people, but they didn't necessarily know each other. So that's one part of it. And then at other times, I need to get a little bit of a break from it. And it doesn't need to be like a hard divorce and like I delete my account. It can be as simple as like just not posting a lot, because then there's a little bit less, like then I get disappointed every time. Right now, if I open Facebook, I'm disappointed because nothing has happened, because I didn't do anything previously. Like last thing I did was I checked it and nothing had happened then either. Right. So it goes through these phases. Sometimes I'll delete the apps from my phone just so that it's like I'm less likely to engage with it. I think the interesting thing is not to find the right space in the middle. The interesting thing is to observe myself and where I am. And for example, also to your question before about stress, I think if I notice a stress pattern in myself, like that's one of the easy ways to cut something that is overly stimulating, is to just like chill it with the social media for a while. That's like one thing. And then go for a run. Like those are probably the two first buttons that I push when I notice a stress pattern in myself.
That's so interesting. I love the story of expressing vulnerability online, and how that's potentially opened up the possibility of a lovely new friendship that you're rewarded with from that moment of vulnerability and connection. That's a wonderful thing. And it's wonderful that we're talking today. We're in different countries on different continents. I love what the internet and social media can do in terms of how it can connect us. I think it's also really important for us to tune into what's important to us at any given time, which is, what I'm hearing you say similarly, to know when to pull back and to know when engaging feels good. It feels like the right thing to do at this moment.
Yeah.
So one of the next questions that I'd love to, listen to your answer on is, where would you live if you didn't live or couldn't live in New York?
There are a few places. We talk about this also, my wife and I. The most obvious one right now would be to go back to our hometown, because then we would be closer to the grandparents, our own parents.
Right.
We're fortunate that we're both basically from the same place. Both of my parents and my wife's parents, they all live within easy driving distance from each other. So if we moved back there, our kids would have all of their grandparents very, very close by. So that's something we talk about. It's also, when we talk about that, I still cannot fully imagine what I would be working with if we lived back in our hometown. And last time I was there in, I think, November of last year. And I literally had this moment walking down the street, close to where we used to live. And I just felt this pressure on my chest. It was I can't breathe. And it's a little overly dramatic when I'm relaying it, but that's how it felt for at least a minute when I was there. So I think for the kids, for the grandparents, I think that would be something. And we're considering it. And I'm even, to deal with that sense of not being able to breathe, what the hell would I do? Actually, what I'm trying to do is just have a little bit more of a presence in Danish media. So I want to pitch a weekly column about family life in New York and see if there's any Danish publication that would pick that up, and just do a little bit, do maybe a talk or 2 talks every year in Denmark, just to have a little bit of presence on the distance. Because what that could do is it could potentially mean that an potential employer could reach out and say, we actually have this job that would be perfect for you. Would you consider moving back? And that would make it a little bit more tangible. It's less moving back to our hometown and then, all these questions. It would be we would move back, and that would be the job. So that's actually one of the strategies for that. Of other places I've visited in the past couple of years, I feel that both Buenos Aires in Argentina is a place that I'm very drawn to. I think also Mexico City, even though I've only been there for a couple of days and only really seen one neighborhood, there was also something there that was really, really, I think especially the architecture, there was just something there that really, really spoke to me.
What about in Argentina? So
similarly, I think the architecture is the thing, and I think the people I met in Argentina are, it's a little bit like New York. I can't quite describe what it is, but there's an openness, a generosity of being in touch with emotion in a way that, most people here are not. Yeah, there's something there that I like. And there is I know, and actually the same in Sao Paulo as well. I don't feel at home in Sao Paulo, but I do a little bit more in Buenos Aires. But the people actually have a similarity in that these are countries with lots of uncertainty on a political, economical scale. And it's the normal. I'm not saying that there's no anxiety, but I'm just saying that the threshold for anxiety is at a whole different level. So the comfort in ambiguity is a lot higher for people there. And I resonate with that, I think. People are just, chill with it in a different way.
Right. And so I'm interested to know about how much of your identity is linked with being a New Yorker versus someone who is originally from Europe versus someone who's a global citizen.
Yeah. I think part of moving to New York, that whole 10-year phase I talked about from the dream and until we moved and began really settling in here, I think the identity part came before we actually moved here. My first Twitter handle was Matthias NYC. And this was 2008. That was 3 years before we actually moved. So I made it a part of my identity that I was moving to New York. And I would literally say it like that, even though I didn't know when or how or if it would even happen. So I think it has been a huge part of my identity. And I remember a trip to Lisbon where I came back, landed in Newark Airport, and the plane touches down and the captain comes on the speaker system, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Newark International Airport. On behalf of United and this New York-based flight crew, we want to thank you for flying with us. For those of you, who are visiting, have a great stay. And for those of you who live here, welcome home. And I was like, that's me. It was just so good, welcome home. So, in those moments, it's definitely been a huge part of my identity.
Right.
But I also I'm trying to be aware of the fact that when I feel that most of the problems I face are not actually problems of the world. Most of the things that stress me, most of the things that disappoint me, most of the things that cause anxiety are usually when I've become too invested in some part of my identity that is then challenged by something. And so I'm trying to be very aware of whenever I make my identity too solid in any direction. And so I think, for example, this whole idea of being a New Yorker, if I was too invested in that, I wouldn't be able to look at my situation and say, well, what's actually best for our kids? Is this actually best for our kids? Right now, I think it is. But I think if it becomes an identity thing, or at least if it becomes too much of an identity thing, I think there's a huge risk of losing the clarity of what actually is going on.
Right. So you just mentioned the word clarity there, which is such a great point, because I wanted to ask you about your clarity cards and the genesis of those. Yeah. And also the genesis of your really spectacularly beautiful handwritten newsletter, which is the only handwritten newsletter that I receive in my inbox and one that I really enjoy reading. So I'd love you to tell us a bit more about how those two things evolved.
Yeah. So the handwritten newsletter came out of the consulting work that I was doing before the job that I'm in now. I mentioned it in the intro. When I was consulting with startup CEOs, a lot of the work we were doing together was around clarity. It was around their reality was a small team trying to build something that hasn't been done before. There's no manual. There's no guidelines. There's no best practice, or there's lots of best practice, but the best practice are of the people that have come before you that were doing something different. And a lot of what you're challenging is maybe if those best practices are actually the best practices. So you don't want to go there necessarily. And you're both trying to think long term and dream big and, make something that's a compelling vision that will allow you to raise more funds. And at the same time, you're executing every day and everything is going wrong all the time. And so there's not a lot of room for clarity in that. And so a lot of what we were doing together was this work of just taking a moment, taking an hour, 2 hours, stepping outside of the madness and looking at that. And we would use tools that were more conducive to that. So a lot of it was hand-drawn to get away from the distractions and the screen. And so the newsletter grew out of that. It was taking some of the ideas that came up in that work and making them into little, almost like little journal entries with a few drawings, a few ideas, and started to send it out. And the first people that subscribed to it were my own clients. And then it just kind of grew a bit unexpected, I would say, very rapidly after that. So that's the origin of that. And for me, the whole handwriting thing is weird because I stopped writing by hand in 8th grade because somebody had told me that I had bad handwriting, and I had really bad handwriting, and I hated handwriting. I thought it was painful. I thought it was useless. And I started doing everything on a laptop. I was the first in my class to have a laptop to school every day. I did all my homework on a computer so I could print it out rather than do it by hand. Everything. I literally stopped in 8th grade. I didn't write by hand for the next, 12 years.
How old were you in 8th grade for non-Americans listening? Were you a teenager?
Yeah.
Younger?
Yeah, teenager.
Right.
Maybe 13, 14, something like that. I mean, it was overnight, right? It was over a year maybe that I eventually phased out all handwriting.
Wow.
I think by the age of 15, I didn't write anything by hand anymore. Nothing.
Wow.
0. And so I spent the next decade of my life basically living inside of a computer. Everything had to be on the computer. I had my phone. I had a very advanced phone for the time, and there wasn't anything called push notifications, but I could get text messages whenever I got a new email. So the experience of getting constantly buzzing something in your pocket, I had not just for text messages, but for like text messages that were indicators that I had emails coming in. And then I could, use my phone to dial up to the internet and download those messages and respond to them everywhere. So I really lived for 10 years inside the internet. And I think it was and this is also where it eventually will lead us to the clarity cards. I think the realization eventually was that I didn't actually enjoy it anymore. It was too much madness. And I think it felt like a loss of agency, 10 years later. It was like, oh my God, I'm not really in control of this. I just sit in front of this thing and it takes me places, but it doesn't feel like me and where I want to go. It's more like I'm babysitting a machine, and the machine wants me to do all these things. It wants me to install updates, and it wants me to go here, and it wants me to go there. And whenever I go here, it also takes me here and here. And it's like, I'm not in control. And so handwriting and reflection, which is really the process that the clarity cards support, is breaking away from that. And it's working with tools that don't have distractions built in, and where you realize that you're generating everything. The blank page does not have an agenda. And if you don't bring focus and some effort to it, nothing is going to come. You can sit in front of a computer with no effort for hours because it just keeps giving you a little thing that you can click on, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, all these like micro moments. So the clarity cards came out of, these years of journaling by hand after I tried to step out of the computer for a while. And a friend of mine helped me see that what I was doing was like asking a lot of similar questions to myself and journaling and writing about it. And he was like, other people need to do this. Let's make a tool that helps them do that. We can just, lift these questions out of your notebook and turn them into a deck of cards. And I was like, sure, that sounds great. Thanks for the idea. And now you want me to go and do it. He's like, yeah, let's do it now. And so he stood up. His name is Dave Gray. He's an amazing author, by the way. And if you don't know him, his latest book, Liminal Thinking, I need to plug it because it's one of the best books I've ever read. But he got up, he's a great guy. He gets stuff done because he stands up and he goes, picks up the Post-it notes and like, okay, so let's make the questions. And so this was in the middle of dinner. And so he gets the Post-its, he gets a Sharpie, and we, read through the notebook that I had with me that day. And we lift out, maybe 45 questions and sort them into 4 groups. And then when I came home, I just put them in InDesign and gave them a type treatment and ordered a prototype from some company in China. And suddenly they were a thing.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And really, really an inspiring story. So, Matthias, as we come to the end of our conversation today, I would love you to tell us what it is that you're curious about right now and why.
Yeah, I'm curious about different things, but I think one thing that I'm very curious about is where it's going with humans and machines together. So there's there's a lot of talk about AI right now. And I think most of what's the talk is not, like most of what's happening right now, to me feels like extremely predictable. There were books written, Jeff Hawkins wrote on intelligence 10 years ago, and he basically predicted all the breakthroughs that are happening now. 10 years ago, he was like, this is going to happen when these two lines cross each other. And that's now. He knew that. And it doesn't seem the whole like machine learning thing is like, that seems relatively obvious. But there is a social and societal part of this that has yet to play out. And that's when we begin really applying this in ways that radically begin to displace and change jobs. And what's going to happen there? What does it mean really then to be human? How do we coexist with this? What's the role of love and kindness, for example? I think those things become ever more interesting as more and more of even creative work can be done in interesting ways in collaboration with algorithms. I saw a short film the other day that was where the script was written by a machine learning algorithm. And then, the actors had they still had to interpret and play it and give humanity and emotion to it. But the end result of this collaboration was amazing. It was truly wonderful. And I think there's something really, really interesting to explore there for us, for all of us, and what it means. What does it really mean to be human in this world today? Not just human with my notebook and free from distractions, but also the humanity we talked about with social media, where you're plugged in and you're human with thousands of people at a time. In a scale, you can experience compassion and generosity and love and kindness at an unprecedented scale. Seeking that out, I'm also extremely curious about what that does, what that feels like, what that means. Yeah.
I love that. What a fantastic way to end the podcast today. Now, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Googling Matthias Jakobsen will probably be a good place to start, but you can also go directly to my own website called Think Clearly, spelled without the vowels. So it's ThinkClearly.com.
Fantastic. Matthias, thank you so much for being a guest on the Urban Curiosity podcast today.
Yeah, this was super fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Urban Curiosity podcast. Get the show notes and more at urbancuriosity.co.uk/podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring, please head on over to iTunes now and subscribe. If the stories and ideas in the show moved you, please leave a review or a 5-star rating. Until next time, remember this: a curious life is an extraordinary life. I'm Claire Barry, signing off for Urban Curiosity.